Sec. Is everybody being especially shy about their cameras, or is that just the way you set it up?
No, I think that's how usually it is.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. I thought you would. I thought that they were being shy. Okay. So everybody is coming online. Great.
Yes, we
Lovely.
are excited to announce our next guest on our talk series, Mukaalma, Sohail Karmani. Sohail Karmani is a British photographer from London who currently resides in Abu Dhabi. He is a professor at New York University in Abu Dhabi with an academic background in applied linguistics and second language education. He also has an interest in visual ethics and currently teaches a first year undergrad course on power and ethics in photography and a core undergrad course on ethics of the image. He is the author of The Spirit of Sahiwal, a photography book published in 2019 by an international art publisher, Skira Orator. The book primarily portrays of the residents of Sahiwal is a visual testimony of daily life as seen by him on several short-term visits to Pakistan. Welcome, Sohail. Thank you for taking out time for this.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited about this evening's event. Are we going to start straight away, or do you?
Yeah.
Would you like to? What would you like me to do first? Would you like me to talk a little bit about myself?
Yes. Let's
Okay,
start.
so first of all, just as you mentioned, I am from London. I was born in England in a city called Bradford. Does anybody know where Bradford is? Just curious. So Bradford is a city which is sometimes somewhat affectionately referred to as Bradistan, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions as to why that is. It's called Bradistan because of the very high concentration of Pakistanis. But when I was 5, my family moved to London, and that's pretty much where I grew up. And that's really where my formative years as a young man really took place. Now, I think I need to, you've mentioned all the information about who I am, what I do. But I do want to say a few things about Pakistan and my relationship with Pakistan. I grew up in a traditional Pakistani household. My father is from Sahiwal, and my mother was from a city called Jhelum. Does anybody from Jhelum here? Just curious. Give me a shout out if any of you from Jhelum. Nobody. So interestingly, they come from different parts of Pakistan. And what it was in the early 60s, they met in Bradford, I believe, and got married and had several children. And so we actually, my siblings and I, we never really got to see Pakistan. So Pakistan was always kind of looming over us. And our parents had brought along this culture in the 1950s Pakistan, just after partition. And so there was Pakistan looming in the background, but we actually visited a country. At least I hadn't visited it until I got into my 40s. So you're all wondering how old I am. Just in case you're wondering, I'm 54. Normally when I say that, I get gushes of admiration. Nobody's gushing. Okay, fine. I'm going to move on. Fatima is laughing because she obviously thinks I look much younger. Let me crack on with what I was saying. Thank you very much, Fatima. Now, so we had Pakistan looming always, and you have to try and, if you know your history, back in the 1970s, it wasn't a very nice place if you looked like me. Okay, there was a lot of animosity towards immigrants and particularly Pakistanis. And so we were growing up, my generation, with these two versions of Pakistan. There was this one version where our parents would talk about Pakistan in a very kind of romanticized way. They would kind of describe Pakistan as this idyllic place, this lovely sort of village life in its purity. And on the other hand, there was this very uninviting, if you like, characterization of Pakistan as being this very backward, horrible place. I don't know if you know your cricket, but there was a famous British cricketer, England cricketer, I should say, a guy called Ian Botham. Does anybody know who Ian Botham is? No, you guys are a different generation. But he was on a cricket tour to Pakistan for the England cricket team. And when he got back, they had asked him, a journalist had asked him, so, how's Pakistan? And what he said was that Pakistan is a country where you would want to send your mother-in-law. Okay, expenses all paid. And if you know about the idea of mother-in-laws, back in Western society, I don't know how it works in Pakistani culture, but you tend to hate your mother-in-law. And so it's a country where you would send your worst enemy. I think there's a similar idea about the sus, sending her off. And anyway, so that kind of encapsulates that. I grew up with these two visions of Pakistan. One, this kind of, and I was very distrustful of this vision that our parents had. This is what expats, immigrants do. They kind of talk up Pakistan. And on the other hand, I had this idea of this horrible place. And if I'm honest, I kind of was more drawn to the vision of Pakistan being a horrible, dreary place. And I think a lot of my generation do that because, you've got this overwhelming pressure on you, this influence about, who you are and what Pakistan represents. So many years elapsed. When I got into my early 40s, for some bizarre reason, I ended up just getting on a plane and saying, I've got to see this country. No expectations. And I turned up and I was absolutely fascinated. Beautiful country. A country that I had absolutely no idea about. And I was astonished by the colors, the people, the humanity, the warmth of the people. It was such an incredible experience, not just a social experience, but I think a visual experience that I just said, I have to come back. And what I did subsequently is I was just drawn to Pakistan, and I wanted to go back as often as I could. As Rabania was saying earlier, that I live in Abu Dhabi, and that gives me an opportunity. It's a 3-hour flight, of course, and so I'm able to go back and forth. And so I fell in love with this country, in particular the Punjab. I would like to see more of Pakistan, but I fell in love with this country, and I had this kind of overwhelming need to document this. I said, I've got to capture this because this is the Pakistan that I would like to have seen growing up as a young man. So in a sense, I'm going to get a bit ahead of myself here. The book and the project is really, if you like, a book to a younger version of me, because it's the kind of images I would have liked to see. And I may have been a bit more trusting of my parents' view of Pakistan. And so, if you like, this book, among many other things, is, if you like, a way to connect with Pakistan. And it's kind of aimed at young British Pakistanis, perhaps living in the UK, but the diaspora living all over the world. And I think it's a way. It's not, I don't want to say it's a perfect embodiment of Pakistani culture, but that's what the book is all about. And no, I think that's pretty much it. That's really why I have put together this book, and I started to sort of engage. I started to put together this project. I think that's really all I need to say. I can go on and on and on, but that's really why I've got this book. Okay.
No, that's great to know the connection and how you started, and then like what were the factors that were connected to when you had already kind of explored your photography career, but then when you were making these images, or maybe even before coming to Pakistan, or maybe the first time you came to Pakistan, what was the kind of baggage that you had? And then when you came here, when you were making images, or when you fell in love with the country and you were trying to explore Sahiwal and other places, was there a baggage that was really affecting the images that you were making?
I think it's a fantastic question. Of course, everyone has baggage, and so nobody is a tabula rasa, if I can use that fancy word. In other words, nobody comes to a country without any baggage. There is always something there, and so I kind of touched on some of the baggage, which is the whole sort of the post-colonial diaspora immigrant baggage. That's what I brought. But let's talk about it more in terms of the visual aesthetics, because obviously I've been influenced by Western culture. I don't want to say directly, but also indirectly. So what my eye tends to appreciate is going to be in many ways shaped by my visual experience of growing up in Britain or in Europe. And I'm gonna say that some of the big influences. I spent a lot of time in Italy. I just want to throw that in there. So my wife's Italian, and Italy is a country that I know very well. And one of the things that I've been really influenced by is Renaissance art and Baroque art. And there is a painter who I absolutely admire, and it's a guy called Italian painter from the Baroque period, guy called Michelangelo, not the big Michelangelo, Michelangelo Caravaggio. And what I like about Caravaggio, because I think what he does is he embodies for me the perfect photograph. And what I like is the incredible use of light and the sort of very strong, vivid colors. And I find those things, interestingly, I find those in Pakistan. You can't see those colors and contrasts in Europe. You find, those deep reds and those kind of rustic browns and the beautiful afternoon's light. You see those in Pakistan, and I don't know why that is. You probably also see them in India and other parts of the world. You don't see them in the United Arab Emirates where I live, because you've got this very harsh light and everything tends to be black and white. And so part of that baggage, I think, is the Italian experience. I also like some of the Orientalist art, but I'm talking about it just in terms of the color palette. I don't like Orientalist art in terms of what it represents. But that's also formed, that's also in the back of my mind. If I talk more about photography, the list could go on, but I'll give you the names of a few photographers that I like. So I like Sebastião Salgado. Obviously, he photographs in black and white. I like how, I like his photographs. I love how he puts together very simple images with great contrasts, deep blacks. I like James Nachtwey. Are you familiar with the work of James Nachtwey, anyone? Great war photographer. I could go on and on. Ed Cashy, great photojournalist who wrote the blurb on the back of my book. Again, the list goes on, but those are some of the photographers that I'm inspired by. And I guess I could go on and on and on. But to answer your question very briefly, so there's a bit of the Italian there, okay? There's the, I guess there's some of the Orientalist art, French Orientalist art. I don't know if you guys know Jean-Léon Gérôme and Delacroix, those sorts of painters. They have some kind of influence, whether I like them or not. And I'm also influenced by cinema, okay? So some of the directors like Storaro, I don't know, Storaro, the guy who did The Sheltering Sky. I just love how they put together these incredible compositions with great colors. So yeah, no, those are the sorts of, and what it is that I find all of those things in Pakistan. Isn't that great? Yeah, I find all of those things going on almost every street corner in Pakistan, even in Lahore, in Sahiwal, and in all of these places. God, I'm talking too much.
You mentioned colonialism, like UK, and coming to Pakistan and documenting people in Pakistan. How do you kind of connect the colonization and bringing narratives from Pakistan? How do you disconnect that area where you have lived in UK and you have come to Pakistan, and there are these narratives, and some people still kind of are very open about colonialism and how they kind of hate it and how it kind of affected us and the subcontinent. So when making images about life and about people, how do you kind of disconnect that narrative?
Well, the truth is you can't disconnect it. Okay, I think it would be the idea that if you visit Pakistan, that somehow you can blot out the United Kingdom or the British Empire is, I think you're being dishonest if you think so. So Pakistan, sorry to put it like this, but Pakistan, the partition of Pakistan was partly a British orchestrated thing. I don't want to upset anybody here, but it is partly a British project. Okay, so I want to just put that. But when I visited Sahiwal, I had this idea that I'm going to see this culture in its purity. But what's interesting about Sahiwal is that, and I looked into the history of it, that it is in many respects a British city. Because when you go to the city, you've got the railways, okay, these railways were built or overseen. They've obviously been by Pakistanis, but it was built by the British in the British Empire. And right at the heart of the city of Sahiwal, which was really interesting for me, was there's an Anglican church.
Sorry, I think you've been muted. You are mute. Sorry.
Can you hear me now? Can you tell me which bit I was at, please, Rabania?
Railways.
So yeah, no, when you go to Pakistan, you see these railways, these fascinating railways, and you look at them, and I can't remember, I think it's called the Great Western Railways. You can see the signage left by the Brits. At the heart of the city, the whole city is kind of structured around this Anglican church, which sits right at the center. And you think, gosh, this is an Anglican church, not a Catholic church, an Anglican church. And it could be very much in any sort of small town in England in terms of its structure. And then you look, so I'm trying to, just to answer your question, you can't get away from it. You can't make that disconnect. And then you kind of walk around and then somebody tells you, oh, this is a place called Hira Mandi. And that for me is kind of very interesting because you just don't expect that. And I did a bit of research on this, and I'm happy to be corrected otherwise. But a lot of these red light districts that you see in many of the Punjabi were actually set up by the British.
Yeah.
Okay. And so just to answer you, you can't just simply magic away or wish away the British experience in Pakistan. It's kind of looming over you. And when you look at the architecture, you see it. Another thing that we tend to blot out is the Sikh rule, because a lot of people just say, well, the Brits came and they took over from the Mughal Empire, which is not true, of course. There was the whole Sikh experience, and you go to Sahiwal and you can see the gurdwaras and some of the what do you call them? Those really beautiful buildings.
Gurdwaras?
Come on, help me. Those with these beautiful balconies. I'm not talking about religious places.
Really?
Havelis, that's right, the Havelis. And you see some of the remnants of those Havelis inside. And you see, so I think the idea of trying to separate is I think problematic. As a photographer, I think we should try and capture the complexity of Pakistan.
So I think
in all its
moved ahead of way ahead from where I wanted to start the conversation for others. So let's just get back to and maybe start from, take us through the journey of how you kind of explored photography, and then maybe we can come back to how
absolutely,
you
came to Pakistan. I've always had a fascination with images, photography as far back as I can remember. I remember buying a Canon when I was in my early 20s. I was at university and I spent all my grant money and I bought a camera. I remember doing that. But I never really sort of took it seriously. I never looked into I guess because we didn't have a lot of money in those days. And so we couldn't afford cameras, to be quite frank with you. If you want to get into the whole, process, you've got to get all these liquids to fix. And so I couldn't really. So I got this cheap digital camera. But really, my photography kicks off about 10 years ago. I mean, that's really when I went to Pakistan, and actually slightly before that. And I just stumbled on this place, and I thought, yeah, no, I really. So it happened organically. You know, it's not like I thought I want to be a photographer. Actually, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I still want to be a filmmaker. I wanted to make short films because I come from an academic background, okay? And academia is all about sort of, you know, it's all this cerebral stuff. And I was getting a little tired. You write these academic articles, okay, and you put a lot of work into them, and maybe 10 people around the world read them. And I thought, that's a real waste of creative energy. You've really got to do something else. And I thought, films. I really want to get into film, making films, because I think they reach people a wider. And I started getting into photography, into filmmaking, and I made a few sort of short videos. And I thought, no, I can't do this. I've got to learn how to compose. And then I said, I'm going to take a break from this, and I'm going to get into photography. And I never went back. So I got into photography, and I got inspired by some of these great documentary photographers, war journalists, travel photographers. And that's pretty much it. And it kicked off in Pakistan.
And when you arrived in Pakistan, did you say to yourself that, oh my God, I was missing out?
I did, in a sense. And you know what it was? I had this weird sort of realization that, okay, I get it now. This is why the Brits went there. You know, obviously they went there to, let's be frank about it, to plunder the resources, et cetera, but there was a whole bunch of people who went there for the cultural experience. I'm thinking of Rudyard Kipling, who spent a lot of time in Lahore. And so what was drawing them? It wasn't, obviously, they weren't interested in the whole sort of colonial plundering angle. They were more interested in the culture. And I would always ask myself, back in, you know, growing up as a young, why did they go there? I mean, if it's such a horrible place, why did they end up going there? And it all kind of made sense, because you turn up in Pakistan and you think, my God, this country is teeming with culture. And this is a place, I now get it. I now get why Brits cross the seas, you know, and travel such distances, because there's obviously a lot of wealth, a lot of richness in terms of culture, etc., etc. So yeah, no, you know.
And before settling down to Sahiwal, what was happening?
What was happening in what sense? I don't understand.
In Pakistan, when you came here, you went directly to Sahiwal, or you kind of...
let me explain the whole Sahiwal. So why Sahiwal? And I'm going to say this, that I haven't been anywhere else but Sahiwal. I have a brother, my father, from my father's previous marriage. He was married prior to meeting my mother, and he's my brother from my father's previous marriage. And he was born in Pakistan, and we had met on and off when he visited the United Arab Emirates. And so he was partly the reason. He said, no, come along, I want you to meet us, come to Pakistan. And so, you know, my brother comes from a village, some very humble sort of background. And so we turned up at Lahore. This was my first visit. And I met him, and he turns up in a really battered car. And the journey was about 5 hours. And normally it's about 3 hours or 2 hours. And so we made our way. And as I was going through, I was just looking, you know, through the windows and saying, gosh, this is amazing. And so we went slowly, and we finally got to Sahiwal, and this kind of very simple village life. And I thought, I really want to go out and feel this and see. So I had no idea about photography. I was just soaking in the country, or the city, I'd say. And so what I've done is I've gone back and forth to Sahiwal. So he comes and picks me up in Lahore, Allama Iqbal Airport. We get into the car, and then we go to Sahiwal, and I just explore. So it's been convenient. And then finally it dawned on me, said, look, you know what I'm going to do here? I can see a project here emerging. It wasn't that I went there and I said I want to do it. I can see something. I've been photographing, I've been collecting images, I've been sharing them on social media. And I can see a book now. I can see a coherent body of work emerging here. And what I want to do is I want to somehow put this together. So that's really how it kicked off.
So obviously, like you mentioned, you did not think of like a project. You were just absorbing it, and like the energy and the people and looking around.
No.
But take us through the process of working on a book for a book or working on assignment. How different it is.
Well, I don't think it's an either or, because I think you need to look at them as the same. In the case of my book, it's one coherent body of work, but it could be split up into assignments. So right now I'm working on a new book on the United Arab Emirates. So I put together, I set myself an assignment to capture fishermen in Abu Dhabi. And I had that published, and it was CNN was interested, and they interviewed me, and et cetera, et cetera. And so what you can see, that could be one project, but that you can build from that. You can say, I'm going to have a chapter on fishermen, a chapter on, I don't know, the fish market, or constructions. So you shouldn't, I think, just see it as, all right, I'm going to have a book in mind, and what I'm going to do is just focus, because I think that can be self-defeating. Because what tends to happen is you start off with a project and you actually end up saying, I don't think I want to do that. Okay. And so I think you shouldn't see it as an either or. You can do assignments, and you can see those assignments as being part of a bigger project, namely a book.
Yeah. So usually we ask photographers about their issues or their difficulties that they face when they're publishing a book, and that is usually keeping in mind the Pakistani market, and also looking at that there are not a lot of photo books, and publishing is expensive, distributing is expensive, and then when the book finally comes out, the book is also expensive, and there are very few people who would buy the book.
Yeah.
But I would also want you to take us through your experience of publishing a book or distributing it, and kind of what were the difficulties that you were facing, maybe, or like I kind of asked that when you are sometimes as a photographer you were offered a book that maybe like you said that he said to you that I see a book, right? So when that happens, as a photographer, does it feel slightly impossible or possible
No, it doesn't. No, I mean, I think what happens is, I know when I talk to photographers, is if you fixate on a book, then I think you're sort of, to some extent, and I don't think it's anything where you're kind of going on an ego trip. I want a book because this is going to be a new milestone in my life, and when I get a book, it's all going to happen. I'm going to become this amazing, famous, renowned photographer. And I have to say, just because you get a book published, it doesn't mean that it's going to end up with lots of work, and you're going to be interviewed by such amazing people like Rabania. It's not necessarily. It's just there is some luck involved, Rabania. I'm going to say that. But let me talk you through the process. One of the first things I would say to photographers here is this: that you've got to come up with a coherent body of work. That's one of the first things. You can't just say, I want to get my book. You've got to start with a coherent body of work. And you've got to have a signature. Okay, your photographs they've got to have a consistent feel to them. So that when I'm looking at one of your photographs, Rabania, I'm going to say, this is a Rabania photo. I should be able to say that immediately. And that's part of putting together a coherent body of work. So I think you need to the first step is you need to do that. And I had come to a realization, I had developed a style, okay, and I've stuck with it. So when you find your visual voice, okay, go with it. Again, it takes time to, and you don't want to emulate other photographers. You can take bits and pieces, but so the first step is getting a coherent body of work with a consistent style that you can say is yours. I actually used social media a lot, and for some reason my work, went viral. It went viral on Flickr. It went viral to some extent on Facebook, and so on and so forth. And that helps, okay? And I'm not sure if I'd be here today if that experience, I don't know. And so, yeah, so that happens, and that raises your profile. And then you've got to start sort of trying to submit your work. And then you get to this point where you think, you know what, I'm not bad, actually. I'm quite a good photographer. You know what? And I have to say something about my photographer. There are some mornings when I get up and I think I'm the worst photographer on this planet. And I want to give this up and do something a bit more useful. But there are other days when I get up and I think, gosh, Sohail, you are such an amazing photographer. I mean, who the hell is James Nacht? And you get into that, and you have to do that. You have to have that experience. There is that vanity, and I won't believe any of you. All photographers are vain. And I'm seeing Amina nodding in agreement. We're all vain. Okay, and I think we need to embrace the vanity, okay, and not shy away from it. So you have to believe in yourself. So anyway, so you get together a set of images, and you're happy with yourself. So the next thing is, you raise your profile, and then at some point on social media, I wanted to say that I was contacted by CNN on Facebook. Okay, they didn't send me a really formal, they could have sent it to my NYU account, my New York University. No, they contacted me on Facebook. So that just gives you a sense of, the way the world works. And so gradually, I think if your work is good enough, or let's say, I don't want to say good enough, but if it's marketable, or people see it as being something that's worthy of attention, then you're going to get that attention. Okay, so what happened next is I got a few people contact me and say, look, we really like to publish a book. I think this is book potential. And you get a lot of people wasting your time, okay? And so I said, yeah, good. So at some point, there was an Italian woman who said, look, I really like your work, Sohail, and I think I can do something for you. And I said, yeah, okay, why don't you go for it? And she was my curator, Francesca Interlenghi. And so, I just thought she's one of the many other people who are doing this. So then she let's put together a proposal, and she did all the hard work. And she goes to one of the, some of the big publishers. And I had contacted some of the big publishers as well. I had contacted Taschen. Taschen is like the most important, is the publishing publisher in the world, I think. I can't think of any other publisher. So I wrote an email, I just went to their website and wrote an email to Taschen in Germany. I said, look, I've got this work. This is what I do. You got to put together a proposal, a PDF file or something. And I did that, and they came back very, very politely and said, no, we've got to, we're a couple of years ahead. We can't do this. You've got to apply a few years. It takes many years. And so then eventually Francesca really was able to go in and speak to Schira Editore, which is one of the leading art publishers in the world too. And she contacts me as Sohail, and she just says, I got it. We've got it. We're in. And I said, you're joking. I said, yeah, we have a book. They've agreed. And I said, you can't be serious. And so I'm going to say there's a bit of luck. I don't know if there's luck, or maybe she was really good. If you want her address, I can put you in touch with her. Maybe she can do the same for you guys. But Francesca was really good in terms of getting a meeting, and then just going into Milan, the offices. And then we got really excited. And so we started to, they wanted a meeting with me and Francesca, and we went in and we talked about the project. And they just said, yes, this is a go. Let's do it.
So
There's no mystery involved, yeah.
social media, like you said, and you said that you went viral on Flickr, you were contacted on Facebook.
Yeah,
So in virtual world, where do
yeah.
you think that a photo book stands, or is there any importance of a photo book when everything is on Instagram, everything is on the social media, and everything is just turning, the world is a virtual world now. So where do you think a photo book stands?
Well, that's a great. So you're asking me about the role of a photo book, a physical book, and how it fits into a world of Instagram and Facebook, etc., etc. Um, I'm, you know, I mean, I don't want to give you a self-serving answer, which is, oh, because I've got a book, then it must be important. The question that you're putting to me implies that there is a problem there, and I think there is. And one of the problems is that we consume images in a very different way today. Digital images are sort of pixels on a screen, and what we do is we just flick through them very quickly, and but I think with photo books, the visual experience is very different. It slows you down a lot, and that's how we have consumed images prior to the digital image world. So I
Yeah.
think that there is a permanence, as Susan Sontag, she's talked about this, that there is a permanence to photography books or photographs when we hold them. And I think that is very different. There's a very different visual experience. There's a very different visual experience when you go into a gallery, an arts exhibition. You will stop and ponder and look at them, okay? And you won't do that on Instagram. So I think that's one of the very important differences. Another very important difference, a book, a photo book, if you've got a dodgy, problematic, what's the word I'm going to use? Dodgy is very British. If you've got a wobbly fridge in your house, and you need to, photo books are really good for Instagram can't do it. I'm just joking, guys. Let me crack on. No, I think photography books they can be a milestone for a photographer, but I think you've got to get away from that. They don't confer all these benefits and successes we like to think. I think there is a bourgeois element here, a middle class, okay? And as you said, Rabania, if you've got money, you can buy photography book, a fancy one on your coffee. And it's part of this extension of our identity and ego. We like to own things. It's part of, the commodification of the world. It's how the fine art market works. We want to buy paintings. It's because then we can come round and say, look at this painting I've got. It's kind of like an extension of your ego, isn't it? And it might sound a little superficial and crass, but we all do that. And I think, again, we should embrace that element, I think, to some extent, and I think we should also be wary of it. But yeah, no, I think photography books and exhibitions are always going to be around. I know that the visual experience, when I look at books, I have a lot of photography books in my house, and I like to sit down and look at them. I like to look at a body of work. I don't know if that's the case with other people, but no, I think just to answer you very briefly, I think the visual experience is very different.
Yeah, because you talked about coffee table books, and
Yeah.
I usually ask photographers, especially in Pakistan, that there's this trend of photo books, coffee table books, but people don't really buy prints, but they do buy photo books. And what is that difference? I don't know if you've faced it or if you've seen it. That people don't really invest on prints, but they might want to buy a fancy, good coffee table photo book. So, how do you think that works, or have you not experienced it?
That people want to buy a fancy coffee book, a coffee table.
Books, photo books, yeah, but they don't really want to buy prints.
Oh, I see. You mean they don't want to sort of have a a print hanging on their wall.
Yeah.
Is that what are you saying, that that's one of the peculiarities of the way Pakistanis consume images? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because that is something that we really, I think that is something that we experience. That when there are photography shows, photographers don't really sell in that way. And but when a book comes out and it's a nice coffee table photo book, people do
Yeah.
kind of invest somewhere to buy a nice.
Yeah, I don't really know what the answer to that is, because I think the American colleagues, British colleagues, Western colleagues, when you go into their offices, you will see
Yeah,
both. You will see prints on their office walls, and you will also see, the coffee table books. So you see both. I'm just trying to guess. I think you're spoiled for choice. You're thinking, which is the image I'm going to have on my wall, and that's going to really sort of, I don't know, make me feel a little more important or good about myself. And I think maybe people and with a book, I think it's very different. I don't know. I'm guessing, I'm speculating, and it's not a question I can really answer, because I'm sure there will be multiple answers and different answers to different people.
that's fine. That's fine. I'm going back to what you mentioned, like you said, a style. Somebody looking at my picture, somebody looking at your photograph and saying, this is Sohail's photograph, right?
Yeah.
So it's sticking to a style. Do you think that's a bad thing somewhere after working for a while and you kind of stick to a style and then you can't really break through and you kind of stay in the comfort zone and there's a style that you develop? Do you think that's a bad thing, or do you think an artist can kind of stick to a style
No,
for?
I think if you look at the great photographers and think about the periods in which they have been active, I think you can see look at Cartier-Bresson's work, or look at Sebastião Salgado's work. You can see a consistency in their style. And look at Vivian Maier. You can look at these images and say, that is a Vivian Maier, that is a Nachtwey, that's a Salgado, etc., etc. And you can do that. I think what's important is that we understand, or we get to a point where we're happy with our visual voice. Okay. And that takes time. You might start to add, refinements to your style as you progress. But I think largely the style or the signature is why you've come into photography. Is that this is how I see the world, in terms, compositionally, aesthetically, technically, and this is what I want to project. And you'll come to a point where you think, yeah, I think I've got it. This is me. And I don't think there's anything wrong. And I don't think that's a comfort zone, because it can be quite a painful experience, actually, when you're trying to find your visual voice. You'll have other people looking at you and saying, that's actually, that's crap, that's rubbish. Okay. And then there's a thing that we all need to be aware of, I think, as photographers, which is image envy. Okay. Can you hear me? I think I've slightly frozen. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yeah.
There was a slight lag in the connection. I was just talking about something that we should all be aware of when we're trying to sort of make sense of our visual voice, and is this idea of photography envy. Never go to a great photographer and say, what do you make of my photographs? Because if it's really good, they're not going to tell you. There's a certain envy there. It's just like writing. Okay, you don't want to go to a really, really good writer, because if it's really good, they're not going to tell you. Okay, and so there is an element of that, I think. Okay, and so it can be a very long, painful journey. But I think once you've got there and you're happy with it, then I don't think there's any need to progress.
So we talked about writing and we talked about academics. And while compiling a book, how important do you think text is?
Text. Well, I mean, I'm going to answer this in a very simple way, is that the whole point of a photography book is that the images should speak for themselves. It depends, of course, on the kind of photography that you're doing. If you're doing a book on fashion photography, then I think you may not need so much text. If you're doing travel photography and you want to somehow contextualize or frame your work, then some text is necessary. But you know, and that's just to give you, they're like footnotes. But what you should never do is have text to help appreciate the photographs, because that's a failure. The image should speak for itself, okay? And it should, and the text should be there to elucidate perhaps certain aspects, but it shouldn't be there to sort of say, you know, this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I want you to feel. This is how, you know, you shouldn't, the images. Now, there is a question about captions. I had when I was putting together my book, I mean, I was talking to the editor, we had a discussion, should we have captions or not? And I wanted to, you know, like I had my sort of photojournalist hat on. I said, no, we need captions. And I listened to his advice, and he said, why do you need captions? A man is reading a newspaper. What's the big deal here? And you can see that. And he actually convinced me with the photo book, the photography book that I put together. I think it makes sense not to have text. But I don't think there's a, you know, I don't think there's a very definitive answer on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of ask you your personal opinion on it, because you have this academic background, you're also into teaching. So I'm coming back to education. I'm coming to education now. Because you teach, and you teach very powerful subjects like power and ethics in photography. And unfortunately, we don't have that in Pakistan. So I just want you to briefly kind of take us through the journey of teaching photography, and when you kind of when you go into a class and you know that you have students that want to learn other sides of photography too, not only the technical stuff.
Okay, so I want to. Sorry, go ahead.
So how does that go, and how does that kind of affect the culture on a bigger level, like on a larger level? Because, you know, that's, do you think that education is the right route to, photography education is the right way to kind of expand the understanding of photography in a culture, or in the younger people, or in the next generation? Is that how it goes? Through
yeah, no, let me just say very quickly, I'm self-taught as a photographer. I didn't do any courses, and so I made lots of mistakes on my way, and I think we all need to, education of course it does help, but I want to stress that in the photography courses that I teach at New York University, they are not they are theoretical courses, okay? Yeah. And what I do is I teach visual ethics. And the reason I teach visual ethics comes out of my work, because as I've progressed as a photographer, I've come across all sorts of issues which I've tried to resolve, ethical issues like, am I misrepresenting Pakistan here? Am I perhaps indulging in some kind of Orientalist fantasy? Okay. Am I looking for the white man's validation? Did I seek consent in my work? Am I indulging in, I don't know, what they call poverty pornography? You know, the idea that I'm sort of getting off on young children, and those sort of questions come up, and you know, when you have a lot, I mean, there is a bit of that. People tend to be very critical. And so I thought, I really need to look into this, okay? And I started reading into and looking into this more closely. And so that's where my whole visual ethics angle comes. And there are no easy answers to lots of those questions. There are lots of easy put downs and sound bites, but if you actually, so what my course does, it explores a lot of those ethical complexities and tries to sort of come to an understanding of, is it right to do what you're doing? To put it very simply. So that's the visual side. You asked me about education. I also teach my students how to photograph, not technically how, but I teach them how to put together a body of work. I teach them how to write photo essays. And I've had a few students who've been very successful in putting together photo essays and having them published. And I think, so I don't tell them, this is how you set the exposure and this is how you, the F stop. I don't do all of that. I just assume that those things are very easy to learn. But I will look at, if a student asks, I will try and help. But I think you can do quite a lot on your iPhone, where you don't have to know the technicalities. There's a lot you can do nowadays just to give you an idea, the technical complexity of an iPhone, I mean, in terms of image quality, is far superior to what Cartier-Bresson was doing in the 1950s. Okay, imagine if he had an iPhone. Okay, today he wouldn't be saying, "Oh, the only reason you take good photographs is because you got a better camera." Absolutely not true. So there's a lot you can do with the camera in your phone. And the field of view in a camera phone is it's like a 28mm lens. And it's exactly what I use. I use a 28mm lens when I'm shooting. And so the answer is the technical side is actually very easy. What I teach my students, and I think can be taught, is putting together a story, a coherent body of work. And
so
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like, you teach other than technical stuff, right?
Yeah.
And you teach them. So we don't really have that in Pakistan. So do you think that through education, this is really important to do, like kind of open up to different, kind of opening up different chapters other than technical stuff? Do you think education is the right route to take it, to address it to the younger people?
Yeah,
Or the younger
there's a class element to this. Do you realize there's a class element? What you're doing is you're reaching out to the middle classes who have, moneyed middle classes who have money and they can afford to do this. And so, yeah, if that's what you're trying, if you feel that's a sort of worthwhile thing that you want to explore in your life, yeah, I would encourage that. I'm always trying to encourage my students to be photojournalists, and I'm trying to inspire them into sort of saying, look, you can really put together compelling stories. And so I think, yeah, and I'm going to say just what's interesting about Pakistan is that Pakistan is a country which, just as a subject matter, has produced some of the greatest photographers in the world. So Steve McCurry wouldn't be a photographer today if it wasn't for the Afghan girl that he shot in just around, was it near the borders, I think in Islamabad. But he shot that photograph in Pakistan, okay? And he wouldn't be here today. He wouldn't be sort of the top, most famous photographer in the world. That image of the Afghan girl is considered to be the Mona Lisa of the photography world, and it was captured in Pakistan. Another great photojournalist, I think that comes to mind, even Cartier-Bresson has photos in Karachi. Who else? Emilio Morinati, Spanish photographer, won a Pulitzer Prize, photographs in Pakistan. Who else comes to mind? Mohammed Muhaysin, fantastic photographer. Do you know Mohammed Muhaysin? If you look at his Instagram account, he's a Pulitzer Prize photographer, and a large portion of his work is because of what he shot in Pakistan. In fact, if he hadn't visited Pakistan, it would be nobody today. So what I'm getting at is that you've got this amazing visual culture, okay, that's staring at you in your face. And I think there can be some great images if young people, to answer your question, could somehow begin to see Pakistan that they take for granted every day and capture it. And somehow, I don't know, but I think there's a lot of potential there. I have this romantic idea of maybe a young boy. I mean, I've got nephews, and there's one of my nephews in Sohail, and he's been accompanying me, okay, acting a bit like a fixer every time, and he's taking me around all these places, and he's suddenly got inspired, and he says to me, Chachu, maybe photographer banna chahna. Did everybody get that? It was Punjabi, by the way.
Yeah.
And so I like this idea of somebody, maybe it's a romantic idea, some young boy from a rural culture getting a really old battered camera and producing something beautiful. And maybe it's too romantic, maybe it's a bit Hollywood-esque, but I do think there's potential.
Lastly, I would want you to share some fun fact or fun story
I'm
with
not a very funny guy. What am I going to say? All right, a fun fact about my life.
anything, fun story, lighter note to end this conversation.
Rabania, it's been a very miserable life. A fun fact about my life. I'm going to have to think about that one. Does it have to be photography related?
Anything.
Okay.
Maybe funny story from your trips to Pakistan.
A funny story from my trips to Pakistan. There was one moment when I was taking a photograph in Pakistan, and this is not particularly funny, but I found it funny. And I came across this old woman. She was tending to her cows in the field. Beautiful, typical rural scene in Pakistan in the village. And I looked at her and she reminded me of my mother, the way she was dressed. And I said to my brother there, I said, and then, you can't take pictures of women. And he said, photo करिए तुसी जरा ओदे नाल गल करो ते इंशाल्लाह ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੀ photo खींच ਲੈਣੇ ਆ. And he said, no, this is not going to happen. And so I went up to her and I said, auntie ji, मैं आपकी photo खींच सकता हूँ? And she was okay about it. And so I got into all these positions and I started taking a photograph. And then my brother said, let's go. Because, and I found it funny because further down, I could see all these young men and these kind of middle-aged men coming along with sticks and they were going to beat us. And so I thought, this is a lot of fun. And so they were closing in on us, but a car was parked in a very awkward position. They got very close. And we just, we suddenly able to get off, you suddenly get out of that position. We got out very quickly and all of us started laughing in the car and said, that was really close. And we could see them in the back of the car. And I thought it was very amusing. I don't know what would have happened, but that's how dangerous things get. Anyway, that's a fun fact. It's not very funny, but I found it funny at the time. Anyway, that's it. That's all I can say, really.
Thank you, Sohail. Thank you so much for taking out time. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a real pleasure. Absolutely. Did anybody want to ask questions? I'm really curious if anybody had questions.
We received questions. People are saying, somebody said Pakistani cool factor. And then Amna Yassin also said that the picture was...
Somebody said Pakistan cool factor by Ilyas Karmani. I just want to stress that Ilyas Karmani, I'm talking about the ugly guy over there. Can everybody see this? Not particularly good looking as I. This is actually my younger brother. And so just in case you're wondering, I'm just teasing him. I do like questions, okay, Fatima, I want you to, and I want Amna, I don't know if she's still there. And if you do have questions, okay.
Yes, they have seen.
I've got one from. So what ethical codes have you chosen to abide by? Ooh, that's a very, very big question. Okay, so one of the things I have come to a realization to is that I want to dignify my subjects. I don't want to take photographs that inspire pity. At least that's not what I set out to do. So I don't want people to sort of look at the subjects and think, gosh, what a pitiful situation. So I don't like to photograph extreme, but poverty and it's inescapable. But if I'm going to photograph somebody, obviously somebody who lives in poverty, I want to somehow dignify them. Okay, and if I do capture something that I think is not dignifying, I will not share it, and I will delete it, or it will not And I think that's a very, very thin line because it's very subjective, but at least that's what's going on in my head. Okay. Ambreen, if you're asking that. So that's one. Consent is a very important thing. And I'm a slow photographer. I don't just go in. I don't like doing things stealthily from the background. I really like the social experience of photography. So I want to talk to someone and say, look, I really want to get your picture. And so I really strike up a conversation. And normally, sometimes people say no. But the no for me is the beginning of a yes. And it always tends to end up as a yes. And I think you need to have that in the back of your mind. So that's my answer. Did you share the image of the woman you photographed? No, I didn't, because I didn't think it was a great photograph. I guess because there was something uneasy about doing this. But no, the lighting might not have been great. No, before being chased by sticks. Is this the image Pakistan wants to project to the world? So I'm getting this really profound philosophical question from my brother, who wants to show us that he's a real smarty pants. That's fine. Is this the image? When I put together this book here, okay, and so some people will say, and I'm going to give you I was once presenting my work publicly, and there was a Pakistani woman. She was a fashion photographer, and obviously very middle class. And she got up and said, I don't like this. This is showing Pakistan in a very bad light, and what you're doing is wrong. And this, and so she was very dead against it. And she thought, and I said, so first of all, what I wanted to say to her, and I did reply to her, is that I don't pretend that my work is embodies Pakistan perfectly. It's just my vision of Pakistan. It's my Pakistan as I see it. And I don't have any pretensions about it being somehow all defining, because no photographer can do that. I think if you were to put together a set of photographs, Rabbani, it'd be very different from Fatima's and Amna's and Ambreen's. So, we all have so she put together, and I said, look, poverty, village life is a massive part of what Pakistan's all about. And to pretend that it doesn't exist is almost a disservice. I know you're feeling a little embarrassed because you're in Western company and you want to show Pakistan in a very positive light. And you might think that Pakistan is all about fancy dinners in fancy places in Pakistan. And you're a fashion photographer and you want to show beautiful Pakistani women on the catwalk. And I said, that's a small, tiny bit of Pakistan. I actually like to believe that I'm showing the real Pakistan. And obviously I don't show it perfectly. I have my biases and my subjectivity that I bring to it, like all of us do.
So there are a lot of questions. How does diaspora react? What do you want people to take away from your book? And you said that the images should speak for itself. Then how to set a narrative for a book or photographs? So how do you kind of...
All right, I've got a terrible short-term memory. So let me just take one of those questions, which is, what do I want people to take? It depends. I mean, I kind of touched on that earlier. I do hope that young British Pakistanis or American Pakistanis, that they will look at this and it will give them a flavor of that Pakistan's. So that's one thing. I do want to show, because I do like to think that I humanize and dignify my subjects. So if you're a Westerner sitting in New York or in London, and a lot of Westerners work, okay, and this is perhaps the way I said, look, this is Pakistan, okay, and obviously it's not the Pakistan that you see. What was that American scene? Was it Homeland? Can't remember. There was do you know what? There was people have this crazy vision of Pakistan. Everybody's in these dark burqas and long beards, and it's much more colorful than that. So I want to obviously, I think that if people come away with a different flavor of Pakistan in the West, I think I'm not saying the only, but I don't want them to think that it's all about village life, but this is a significant portion of it. That's what I want to do, I guess.
You said that images should speak for itself. Then how do you set a narrative?
Okay, I think when images, so in my book, I didn't, when I was putting together my book, I didn't go to my publish and said, here's 120 images. There you go. Just, you've got to sequence them. I spent a lot of time on sequencing. Okay. And I kind of started off with a sort of a wide angle view. This is the village. This is Pakistan. And then I kind of focus in on a street level, and then I show people going about their everyday life, and then I focus on some of the faces, and I try to get a mix of male, female, children, elderly, and so what you do is you're putting together different kinds of shots. Okay. And if you look through the book, there is a sort of narrative. It's not a very strong narrative, but a lot of it is it's the visual narrative, and you can't explain that always in words. So I'm looking at the color palette, I'm looking at contrasts, and the whole idea is that you go and have this visual journey. You look at this work, and it takes you on a journey, and there's got to be some kind of continuity. And you do that because you have some kind of sensitivity about color palettes, contrasts, portraits, wide angle shots. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
And different photographers obviously have different ways of kind of compiling their book. Like some would do it through text, or maybe some would do it through subject matter, and you kind of chose compositions and color palettes. So yeah, it's different for every photographer.
It is, no. Go for it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so there's one last question we're going to take. How does diaspora react?
How does the diaspora react? It's obviously I didn't go out and say, "Hey, diaspora, how are you? How do you?" It's a very it's obviously a very
yes. So yeah.
This question is sorry?
By Elias.
Oh, sorry. Where does he say? So I can't see his question. Where is it? How does the diaspora react? Oh, I see. Right, this is Elias's question.
Yeah.
So the diaspora is a massive bunch of people. We're all very different. It's not like there's some homogeneous group, that you can contact on WhatsApp and WhatsApp group or on social media. But let me answer that and see if I can try to answer what's behind that question. I think that I'm hoping that they will buy into the visual aesthetic and experience that I, as a diasporic Pakistani, have kind of indulged in, and I hope that they will feel so. But I haven't really tested it in a marketing sense, because the book hasn't. Because of COVID and the pandemic, I haven't really had a chance to launch it. But I can only speculate that I think it would be received quite well, actually. I think they would like to see that. Maybe there's a bit of the vanity, creeping in there. But I would like to think that they would respond to it very positively. Can I ask you that question? And it's a question that I would like to. How do you think? I mean, you're all sort of well-to-do, middle-class Pakistanis. Am I right? I'm just guessing. You don't have to answer. How do you guys see it? Because I'm actually quite surprised. No, tell me, how do you see it? Do you see this testing or this documentation of Pakistani culture or so what? Does it speak to you on any level? I'm just curious. Be honest. I'm not fishing for compliments here.
I think when I see the images, I kind of feel that there is this simplicity, and that is why I kind of also talked about baggage and the whole the landscape that is affected by the British, and like you talked about Sikhs and the architecture and everything. It's pretty complex. And when usually people come to Pakistan and they want to document it or they want to experience it, there are these political narratives that are attached to it. And I think when we look at the work in the Sahiwal series, the spirit of Sahiwal, I think there is this simplicity that you kind of enjoy. And in a book where you talk about being permanent, it's not on social media that you kind of just swipe it. Being in a book, that kind of complements the spirit that you're kind of trying to bring out, because it's a book and it's about just simple people living their lives. So I think I kind of enjoy it because it's not that on that level where everybody's coming to Pakistan and saying, oh, this is like a political place and this is exotic.
Talk to me about the familiarity. Is the Pakistan that I capture here in Sahiwal, is this far removed from your everyday experience? Okay, and I do want to get some, is it distant, or is this something that is incredibly familiar to you?
I think it depends. Like you said, the class, and all those factors that we talked about. Like, if I am a street photographer, or maybe I would like to go and talk to people on different days, and kind of interact with children and give them old cameras to just see how they kind of react. So that for me might not be an alien situation, but maybe for a lot of people who are living in Lahore, for them it might be a more far like a experience.
Okay,
But so I think it kind of depends on who you are and what kind of interests you. I am sure like people like Amna and other people who kind of are interested in culture and social landscapes. I think for us it's not like a very distant experience on our daily lives.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. No. Okay.
So there's one
Ronnie, can I just come in quickly with a point? Sohail, wonderful to see you, and thank you for a wonderful conversation. And Rabbani, thank you for chairing this wonderful session as well. I just want to say something, obviously, as someone who's followed your work and has been inspired by your work as well. The thing I wanted to say is that, I feel that as Pakistani diaspora, I think Pakistani people have an enormous capacity for creativity. And it's because we live in such a politically, culturally, socially, spiritually, emotionally rich environment with a rich history, heritage, and culture. And so the point with the book, Sohail, what I find interesting is that it actually stirs all of those different dimensions in you. Part of us has there's a part of us which is very critical, and it almost like a fetishization and romanticism. Part of it is about, surely we want to project more about modernity and how we're progressing, and we want to distance ourselves from the part. Part of it's inferiority complex, and part of it's also taking pride in the fact that, this is us, and this is part of our rich heritage that we are very proud of as well. So I think the point is this, it stirs all of that, which is actually about stirring the creative process. So I think ultimately the book achieves its objectives. And I just want to share with the group here that when our father saw the book for the first time, as a son who left Sahiwal, he was conflicted. On the one hand, he says, why do we want to look at these images? This is what we left, okay. And on the other hand, he was really, the aesthetic richness and there was an aesthetic appreciation as well. So I think really the point is this, it's conflicting. The book is conflicting, and I think it's meant to be. And that's the whole thing about, I think, the creative process. Anyway, thank you. Thanks for, and it's really, really great to see all you today.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing such an interesting experience. We'll just take a last question. What do you think is missing in contemporary Pakistani photography? What would you tell aspiring photographers?
Well, I'm going to answer that in a very simply. I don't have to educate Pakistani photographers. I'm actually going to be learning from Pakistani photographers. There are some great photographers out there, and I think they're getting better and better. So I'm getting a little jealous. They're getting better and better. And there was a point when I didn't like much, I said, no, this is, they're overly saturated. I don't like how they compose them. That may be because of my Western influence, but they are really getting very sophisticated. And there's one photographer here who I would really encourage you to work is Amna Yassin. Her work is very good, and she's being very shy because she switched off her camera. I don't know why. Maybe she's gone off and doing some cooking, but her work is really good, and I like it. And I like her husband's work. Umair's work is great as well.
Umair was my teacher. My photography.
Umair was, I think they're great. I'm not a big fan of black and white. Okay. it seems to be a betrayal for me in such a in such a colorful country. You know, as I said, the whole Caravaggio Italian Renaissance thing is what I see going on, and so I do like the colors. And so I would encourage, if anything, I don't want to encourage because I think it would be presumptuous of me to tell Pakistani photographers what to do, but I would like to see more color in the photography. And I mean, one photographer who I think is Pakistani photographer, I think he's good. And Mobeen Ansari is a great photographer. I think his work is interesting. I can't, but there are lots of photographers who really are upping their game. And so, yeah, this is great. She's back now, Amna. So I think Amna's work is great. And once I advised her, and she can tell me otherwise, that I'd like to see more wide angle. I said, get rid of buy a 28mm lens. I don't know if she took any note of what I said. Did you, Amna?
Yes, I do have a wide angle lens.
Okay.
Sohail wants to see more color.
No, she does black and white work. I'm following her series on the wrestlers with the, I'm just curious how Amna was able to get so close to these wrestlers and there wasn't any embarrassment because they just completely start naked, and she was able to get close to these wrestlers, and I thought that must have been really hard. Okay. So I'm impressed by that series of photographs.
Thank you so much. And my next series is quite colorful.
Okay, I look forward to seeing that.
We look forward to it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We had such a lovely talk. We are just, it was lovely having such great people on the in the chat. Some very interesting questions. And Sohail, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for taking out time.
It's been a real pleasure, and I've enjoyed this session. And I want to just say that this is the first time I've actually had a chance to speak to Pakistani photographers. I often get invited by, to other sorts of similar events, but this is my first one.
Thank you.
I would like there to be more of these, inshallah. And
we would love
thank you
to.
very much.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lovely to have you.
Signing off. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.